I cooked their meals. I cleaned their house. I raised their grandchildren. For 7 years, I heard the whispers behind my back. She's nothing, just the housemaid. The day I walked out, I didn't say a single word. I didn't need to. What happened in the weeks after I left, what they discovered, what they lost, what they desperately tried to get back, that is the part of the story I want you to hear. Because the most satisfying revenge isn't loud, it isn't traumatic, it isn't petty. The most satisfying revenge is simply becoming everything they said you could never be and watching them realize it from a distance. My name is Hannah, and this is my story. I grew up in a small town called Hartwell, North Carolina. Population just under 6,000. The kind of place where everyone knows your name, your mama's name, and your grandmother's name, and has an opinion about all three. My mother, Linda, raised me and my younger sister, Becca, almost entirely on her own after our father left when I was 9 years old. She worked double shifts at the county hospital as a nursing aide for nearly 2 decades. She never once complained. She came home with tired feet and still made us dinner. She came home with a broken heart and still helped us with homework. She was the kind of woman who carried the weight of the world on her shoulders and somehow managed to make it look graceful. That is the woman who raised me. I graduated at the top of my class from Hartwell High School. I earned a partial scholarship to UNC Wilmington and studied business administration. I waitressed 3 nights a week and worked the front desk at a motel on weekends to cover the difference. I didn't have a safety net. I had work ethic. I had my mother's eyes looking back at me every time I thought about giving up. I met Isaac Whitfield in my junior year. He was finishing his MBA. He was tall and quiet and had this way of looking at you like you were the only person in a crowded room. He was from Raleigh, from a well-established family, as he put it on our 3rd date, with a small, slightly apologetic smile. I didn't know what well-established meant to the Whitfields until the day I met them in person, and by then it was already too late to walk away easily. Isaac and I dated for 2 years. We were good together. He was steady and calm, and he made me feel safe in a way I hadn't felt since I was a little girl sitting in my mother's lap. We talked about the future constantly, a home of our own someday, a couple of children, a quiet life built on something real. When he proposed, I said yes before he even finished the sentence. I was 24 years old. I was in love, and I had absolutely no idea what I was walking into. The Whitfields lived in a beautiful, sprawling colonial home in a gated community outside Cary, North Carolina. 5 bedrooms, 4 bathrooms, a kitchen bigger than the entire apartment I had grown up in, a backyard with a garden that was maintained by a professional landscaping crew every other Thursday. They had money, old money, the kind of money that doesn't talk, it just quietly assumes. Isaac's mother, Clarissa Whitfield, was 61 years old and ran that house like a general runs a military base. She was elegant in an icy way, perfectly dressed every single day, even at breakfast, perfectly composed in every situation. She smiled with her lips, but never with her eyes. From the very first Sunday dinner I attended as Isaac's girlfriend, she looked at me the way you look at something that doesn't quite belong, politely confused, faintly displeased. Isaac's father, Robert, was mostly harmless in the way that passive men in powerful households often are. He was quiet, he was retired, he spent most of his time in his study or on the golf course. He wasn't deliberately cruel, he was just absent. He smiled when it was appropriate, nodded when he was supposed to, and never, in all the years that I knew him, went out of his way to make me feel welcome or seen. Then there was Ashley, Isaac's younger sister, 26 years old, had never worked a full-time job in her life, owned a communications degree that hung framed on her bedroom wall, and served no other purpose.
She was her mother's shadow. She mimicked Clarissa's silences, her raised eyebrows, her thin-lipped expressions of disapproval. She was not a mean person, exactly. She was something more dangerous, a person who had simply never been taught to see people like me as fully real. When Isaac first told his family we were engaged, Clarissa's exact words, as Isaac reported them to me later that evening, were, "She seems like a hardworking girl." He thought it was a compliment. He genuinely believed that. I knew better, even then. I said nothing. We got married in June, a small ceremony, my choice. My mother was there, my sister Becca, a handful of close friends. The Whitfields arrived in a black SUV like a diplomatic delegation. Clarissa wore a cream-colored dress that was, if you knew what to look for, just one shade too close to white. I noticed. I said nothing. We had talked about getting our own place. Isaac and I had planned it, a 2-bedroom apartment in downtown Raleigh while we saved up for a house of our own. That was the agreement. But 3 weeks before the wedding, Isaac came home and told me that his parents had suggested we move into the Whitfield house. Just temporarily, just for a year or so, until we got our footing financially. His parents had plenty of room. His mother had offered generously. He said it like he was presenting me with a gift. I should have said no. I know that with absolute certainty now. I knew it then, somewhere deep in my chest where the truth lives even when we refuse to listen to it. But I was 24 years old. I was in love. I didn't want to begin my marriage with an argument about his family. And I truly, genuinely, naively thought that if I worked hard enough, was kind enough, gave enough, they would eventually accept me. That belief cost me 7 years of my life. We moved into the Whitfield house the second week of July. By August, I had become the cook. It started gradually, the way all bad things do. The first week, I made dinner once as a gesture of goodwill, of trying. Clarissa said, "Oh, Hannah made dinner," in a tone that implied this was a charming anomaly. The second week, she mentioned she was exhausted from a charity luncheon she had organized. I made dinner again. By the third week, it was simply expected. There was no conversation, no assignment, no acknowledgement. Just a pattern, solidified quickly and silently the way the worst patterns always are. By September, I was making breakfast and dinner 7 days a week. Isaac worked long hours at his father's real estate firm. He left early and came home late and tired. He was kind to me in the way that tired, well-meaning men often are. Forehead kisses, brief questions about my day, falling asleep on the couch before 9 o'clock. I told myself this was temporary. I told myself he was working hard for us. I needed to believe that. I had no alternative belief that I could survive. I found a part-time position at a marketing firm in Raleigh. It was entry-level, but it was mine. A foot in the door. I drove 40 minutes each way, came home and still made dinner, still washed the dishes, still folded the laundry, still did everything that needed to be done. I was exhausted every single day, but that job was the one thing in my life that was entirely mine, and I held on to it with both hands. Clarissa never asked about my job, not once, not in 7 years. She never asked a single question about what I did at work, what I was building toward, what I was working to become. To her, my job was simply an inconvenience that occasionally made me late with dinner. It was not something that mattered. I was not someone who could have ambitions that mattered. The whispers started around year 2. I didn't hear them right away. The first time, I caught the tail end of a phone conversation Clarissa was having with her sister in Atlanta. I was walking down the hallway toward the kitchen when I heard her say, "You know Isaac, he always had to bring home a stray." She laughed, a light, polished, practiced laugh, like it was a charming observation about her son's generous nature. I stood very still in that hallway. I let the words settle into me and find their weight. Then I went to the kitchen. I started washing the dishes stacked in the sink, dishes from a lunch I hadn't been invited to join, and I made a decision in that moment. I was not going to react. I was not going to cry where they could see me. I was not going to give her the satisfaction of knowing that I had heard. But I heard everything from that point forward. I heard Clarissa telling Isaac she couldn't understand why Isaac had settled. I heard her on the phone with her friend Patricia saying, "Hannah came from nothing, you know, one of those little towns." I heard her describe me to a neighbor as practically the help around here. I heard the way she said it, offhandedly, almost fondly, as if it were an established and unremarkable fact. The housemaid. That was what I had become in that house. Quietly, methodically, without ever once saying it to my face, that was the role they had assigned me.
Now here is the thing I need you to understand, because this is the part of the story that matters most before we get to the ending. Isaac didn't see it, or maybe he didn't want to see it. He had grown up in that house. To him, Clarissa's coldness was simply Clarissa's manner. Ashley's dismissiveness was just Ashley being Ashley. He was comfortable there in the way that people are comfortable in cages they were born inside. Every time I tried to explain that something felt wrong, that his mother's treatment of me was not normal, that I was not imagining it, he would squeeze my hand gently and say, "Mom's just like that. She doesn't mean anything by it." And he said it with such calm certainty that I began, slowly and terribly, to wonder if I was the problem. That is the insidious thing about quiet, sustained cruelty. It makes you question your own perception. It makes you ask yourself if you're too sensitive, too dramatic, too fragile to handle a normal family dynamic. It makes you smaller. Bit by bit, year by year, it makes you smaller. And so the person looking back at you in the mirror is a shadow of the girl who once graduated at the top of her class and drove 40 minutes each way because she refused to stop reaching for something. By year 4, Isaac and I had 2 children. Olivia, we called her Livy, and then 2 years later, Nathan. And with 2 small children in the house, I became simultaneously more useful to the Whitfields and more invisible. I was the one who woke up during the night. I was the one who took them to the pediatrician and tracked their vaccine schedules and remembered which brand of sippy cup Livy refused to drink from and which stuffed animal Nathan absolutely could not sleep without. I bought the school supplies and attended every parent-teacher conference and made lunches that the children would actually eat. Isaac helped when he could. He was not a bad father, but he was building a career and I was building a family, and that had become an unspoken agreement we had both entered without ever actually discussing it. What I had not agreed to was also being Clarissa Whitfield's domestic staff. When Clarissa's sister visited from Atlanta for 3 weeks that summer, I cooked for her too, every meal, every day. When Robert's college friends came for a weekend, I made 3 meals both days without being asked and without being thanked. When Ashley threw a birthday party for 20 of her socialite friends, I spent 2 full days preparing appetizers and a full spread while Clarissa stood in the living room accepting compliments on the food as though she had lifted a single finger. "Hannah is very domestic," I heard Clarissa say to one of Ashley's friends that afternoon, standing 6 feet away from me, not lowering her voice. "It's really the one thing she's naturally suited for." I put down the serving tray I was carrying, very carefully, very quietly. I walked to the upstairs bathroom, sat on the edge of the tub, and breathed. I thought about my mother, about watching her work double shifts without complaint, about the way she always said, "Keep your head up, baby. Keep your head up." I sat in that bathroom for 4 minutes. Then I went back downstairs, picked up the tray, and kept moving. But something had shifted inside me that afternoon. Something that had been slowly bending under the weight of years had gotten very, very close to breaking. Year 5, year 6, year 7. Each year added more weight, but something else was happening alongside the weight, something quiet and stubborn and growing. I had been promoted twice at the marketing firm. I had brought in my own clients. My manager, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Gail Mercer, pulled me aside after my second promotion and said, "Hannah, you have a genuine talent for this. Have you ever thought seriously about where you want to be in 5 years?" I hadn't. I had been so completely consumed with surviving where I was that I had forbidden myself from imagining where I could go. That conversation with Gail planted something in me, a small, stubborn seed of possibility that I had thought Clarissa's whispers had killed. I started staying later at work. I took on an extra client. I came home exhausted and still cooked and cleaned and did everything that needed doing. But there was something different in my chest now, something patient and quiet and getting stronger with every week that passed. And then came the night that broke everything open completely. It was a Sunday evening in March.
The Whitfields' annual dinner party. Every year, Clarissa and Robert hosted their closest circle: attorneys, physicians, a few local politicians, old money families who had known one another for 40 years. Every year, I cooked the food. Every year, I spent most of the evening in the kitchen while Clarissa and Ashley circulated through the living room with cocktails. Every year, I watched my husband laugh with these people from across the room and felt more and more like a stranger in a house where I had lived for 7 years. That night, I was carrying a refilled breadbasket into the dining room when Clarissa spotted me and called me over. She was standing with a couple I hadn't met. The husband was a state senator, his wife wearing a necklace I recognized from a magazine that retailed for $11,000. Clarissa said, and I will hear these words for the rest of my life, "Oh, that's just Hannah. She keeps the house running. We'd be absolutely lost without her." She laughed. The senator and his wife laughed, and Isaac, standing 3 feet away, smiled and turned back to whatever the senator had been saying. He didn't look at me. He didn't see his mother introduce his wife, the mother of his children, the woman who had given 7 years of her life to that household as the household help, to a room full of their most important guests. I set the breadbasket down on the table, slowly, precisely. I walked to the kitchen. I untied my apron and folded it on the counter, and for the first time in 7 years, I did not go back. I went upstairs. I sat in the bedroom, and I did not cry. Crying had changed nothing in 7 years. What I did instead was think, with a clarity I hadn't felt in longer than I could remember. I thought about who I had been before I walked into this house. I thought about the girl from Hartwell who drove 40 minutes each way and refused to stop reaching. I thought about Gail's question. I thought about my children asleep down the hall. I thought about my mother and what she would say if she could see me in that moment. And I made a decision, not an impulsive one, not an emotional one, a quiet, deliberate, absolute decision. I was leaving. Not that night, not the next morning, but soon. And when I left, I was going to leave with everything I needed and nothing I didn't. I spent the next 8 weeks preparing in silence. I called a family law attorney, a woman named Sandra Owens, who came highly recommended by Gail. I spoke to my manager about my goals and my timeline. I opened a bank account in my name only. I began setting aside money from every paycheck. I found a 2-bedroom apartment 20 minutes from the firm and paid the deposit with money I had earned. Throughout all of it, I was steady. I came home and cooked the meals. I cleaned the house. I said good morning and good night. I smiled at the dinner table. I gave no indication that anything had changed, because that is the nature of quiet dignity. It does not announce itself. It simply acts. I told my mother. She was the only person who knew. She cried when I called her, not out of sadness, but out of something older and heavier. She said, "I should have said something years ago. I saw it, baby. I saw what they were doing to you, and I should have spoken up." I told her, no, this was mine to figure out, and I figured it out. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "I know you did. I always knew you would." The day I left was a Wednesday. Isaac had left for work early. Clarissa had a morning appointment. Ashley was still asleep. Robert was in his study with the door closed. I got Livy and Nathan up and made them breakfast: scrambled eggs, toast with honey, orange juice. I sat with them at the kitchen table while they ate. Livy was 6, Nathan was 4. They were still so small. They were the part of this that had kept me in that house longer than anything else. Not Clarissa's contempt, not Isaac's obliviousness, my children. But I need to be clear. Leaving was not abandoning them. I was not running away. I was walking toward a version of myself that could be a better mother to them than the woman I had become inside those walls. I had spoken to Sandra. I knew my rights. I had a plan for every detail. I kissed Livy on the forehead. I kissed Nathan on the nose. I told them in my calmest, lightest voice that Mommy was going to spend some time at Grandma Linda. I watched their faces for fear, and I didn't find it. Children trust the voice more than the words, and my voice was steady. I picked up the bag I had packed the night before. One bag, just what I needed. I walked to the front door. I didn't write a note. I didn't leave a letter. I didn't explain myself to anyone in that house. Because for 7 years, I had been explaining myself constantly. I had justified and softened and apologized and folded myself smaller to fit the shape they wanted me to be. I was finished explaining. I walked out the front door at 8:47 in the morning. The air was cool and clean. The sky was a pale, clear blue. I put my bag in my car. I started the engine. I backed out of the Whitfield driveway for the last time. And I did not look back. Not because I was broken, not because I had given up, but because everything worth looking toward was in front of me. Isaac called at noon. I let it go to voicemail. He called 4 more times that afternoon. The 5th time, I answered. "Hannah, what is going on? Where are you?" "I'm at my mother's," I said. "I need some time." "What? Why? What happened?" I considered how to answer that. I thought about telling him everything. Every dinner party, every whisper in the hallway, every moment his mother had described me as the help while he stood 3 feet away and smiled. And then I thought about how many times I had tried, in gentler ways, to tell him exactly that. I said, "I think you already know, Isaac. I think somewhere you already know." He was silent for a long time. "Hannah." "I'll be in touch through my attorney," I said. "Tell the kids I love them. I'll see them Friday." I hung up. The Whitfield house began falling apart within 72 hours. Isaac called asking about dinner, who was responsible, who was going to cook. Clarissa, it turned out, had not cooked a full meal in that house in over a decade. She had outsourced it to me, and before me to a revolving door of people who never stayed long. Ashley could barely manage boiling water. Isaac could handle eggs and pasta and not much beyond that. Within a week, the house that had run like clockwork for 7 years, because of me, had descended into quiet logistical chaos. By day 4, Clarissa had found my cell phone number. She texted me twice. Both messages were careful and polite, more polite than she had been with me in 7 years of living under the same roof. One message asked if I knew where Isaac kept the children's school insurance information. The other asked if I would consider coming back to discuss things calmly. I read both messages very carefully. I saved them. I did not respond. At our first mediated session, Isaac sat across the table from me looking diminished. He had lost weight. There were shadows under his eyes that hadn't been there before. He looked like a man who had just discovered that something he had been taking for granted was in fact the thing holding everything together. He said, "I didn't know how much you were carrying. I genuinely didn't see it." I looked at him across the table for a long moment. Then I said, "I know you didn't. That was part of the problem." And in a moment that surprised even his own attorney, he nodded. He didn't argue or deflect. He said, "You're right. You're completely right." It was the most honest thing he had said to me in years. It didn't fix anything. It didn't change the 7 years, but it was real, and I gave him credit for that. Clarissa called me one final time, about 6 weeks after I left. I answered because by that point I could afford to. She told me she had misjudged me. Those were her exact words. She said she hoped I understood she had only ever wanted what was best for Isaac and the family. She said she hoped we could find a way to be civil for the sake of the children. I let her finish. I let her say everything she needed to say. And when she was done, I said, "Clarissa, I have always been civil. That has never been the problem." And then I said, very quietly, "I think you'll be better to the next woman who comes into your son's life, because the woman after me will not be as patient as I was." There was a long pause, and then she said, in a voice I had never once heard from her in 7 years, something small and uncertain and almost human, "I know." I accepted that. I did not offer forgiveness in that moment, not out of bitterness, but because forgiveness was not what she had actually asked for. She had asked to be understood. And the truth is, I had understood Clarissa Whitfield for a very long time. Understanding someone does not mean tolerating how they treat you. That was 3 years ago. I want to tell you where I am now, because I believe the ending of a story matters as much as the middle of it, and sometimes more. I run my own marketing consultancy out of downtown Raleigh. 12 clients, 4 full-time employees, an office on the 7th floor of a building on Fayetteville Street with windows that face east and catch the morning light in a way that still makes me stop sometimes and just breathe it in. I named the business Henderson Creative, my maiden name. I went back to my name. It felt like the most important thing I did in the first year. My mother came to see the office on the day I signed the lease. She stood in the middle of the empty space, looked out those east-facing windows, and put her hand over her mouth. She didn't speak for a long time. When she turned to face me, she was crying. She said, I always knew you had this in you. And I thought about her double shifts and her tired feet and the homework help and the dinners she made when she had nothing left to give. I thought about everything she had poured into me so that I could stand in that room on that morning. I held her hand and I let her cry. We both deserved that moment. Livy is 9 years old now. Nathan just turned 7. They split their time between my apartment and Isaac's house. Isaac has done the work, real work, not the performative kind. He sees a therapist every week. He has become more present with the children than he was during all the years we lived under the same roof. He and I are not friends, but we are respectful co-parents, and that is more than I had dared to hope for, and it is enough. I drove past the Whitfield house once, not long ago. It was an accident. I had taken a wrong turn and ended up on that familiar road without intending to. I slowed down as I passed, looked at it through the car window. The garden was still perfectly maintained. The SUVs were still in the driveway. It looked exactly the same as it always had. I felt nothing. No anger, no grief, no old ache reaching back toward me. Just a clean, quiet gratitude. The kind you feel when you realize that you walked out of something intact, that the person you were before they started shrinking you is still there. A little quieter, maybe. A lot stronger, definitely. I want to say something before I go, to anyone watching this who sees a piece of their own life somewhere in mine. If you are in a house or a relationship or a job or any situation where your worth is treated as invisible, where what you give is taken without acknowledgement, where who you are is minimized and dismissed and quietly, consistently disrespected, I want you to hear me clearly. Your labor is not the price of love. Your patience is not a character flaw, and your silence is not the same as consent. The most powerful thing I ever did was leave quietly, without drama, without cruelty, without trying to force anyone to feel the weight of what they were losing. I simply left. I simply became, and the rest took care of itself. Because here's the truth about people who underestimate you. They need you far more than they will ever admit out loud. And the day you stop making yourself small enough to fit inside their story is the day you finally start writing your own.